All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next book talk in our Taiwan Studies program book talk series. I am James Lin, International Studies, Taiwan Studies program here at UW, and we're very pleased to welcome Chris Horton. And so let me brief introduction. So Chris Horton is a freelance journalist and an author who's been based in Taipei, Taiwan for the past decade. He's spent 13 years living in China, 2 years in Hong Kong. We're talking about some of our experiences. Some wonderful places in China. He's lived beautiful, which I'm jealous of. He's written extensively for the New York Times, Bloomberg News, Nikkei Asia, The Atlantic, and elsewhere, writing about security, diplomacy, economy, politics. My favorite. It's hard to pick a favorite, but the one that I really liked for the obituary that he wrote for Tungning, I thought was a nice, really wonderful work. New York Times covering historical figures. So this afternoon, Chris will be giving a talk about his newly published book, hot off the press, I think. Just it's published in the United States.
Published in July. United States on this week. So,
on Tuesday. So
the first stop on the book tour.
So hot off the press, Tuesday released in the United States. This is his pretty extensive for that Chris is doing. So we're very fortunate to have Chris stop here in the U.S. Ghost Nation: The Story of Taiwan, Struggle for Survival. I'll also mention that we don't have any books for sale here, but we will show a QR code that you can scan and purchase with. Is there a discount?
I don't know.
There is.
There is.
With a discount. So
fantastic.
If you want to get it on sale, which is not a bad idea, the QR code will be on the slide of the presentation. Okay. Let's give a round of applause to welcome Chris to Seattle.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you everyone for coming and listening to this talk. It's always nice to see people interested in Taiwan, because until recently there really seemed like many people were. And as I mentioned, I've been in Taiwan for the past 10 years, all in Taipei. If you're a journalist, that's where all the action is. Getting into, I want to do an introduction of Taiwan, and people know major bullet points. There's also a lot as a journalist, one of the things I find frustrating about covering Taiwan is usually editors just don't even think about anything prior to 1949. It's kind of like Taiwan just emerged from the sea, and then he moved there. He arrived 4 years earlier, and also think for the 1940s in Taiwan, there were 5 or 6 million people in Taiwan when the KMT arrived. So, this isn't a story of Chinese war, although. So, one thing that we're all is Beijing's claim that Taiwan is inherently Chinese territory. Let's start off with a quiz. Pressure on you guys. Anybody know where this is or what it is? So this is the Taiwan at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, just off of Tiananmen Square. And so, you can see it says "Zui Lai." It's basically saying Taiwan has, since time immemorial or since ancient times, has always been a part of China. And basically, this is there's a pavilion for every administrative region of China in PRC in the Great Hall of the People. This is the only one where it's representing a part of territory that the PRC has never controlled, not for a moment. So Taiwan has always been part of China. Let's go back 400 years to the arrival, basically the end of pre-colonial Taiwan, and this is a painting, a Dutch painting of indigenous Taiwanese from 1670. And the Dutch were the first to set up permanent settlements in Taiwan. And the people who were there to greet them, as it were not Chinese. They're Austronesian-speaking indigenous Taiwanese people. And there's, the exact number of tribes and whatnot is debatable. I think 16 officially recognized now, and a few others that might get officially. Basically, a bunch of different peoples, different languages, and customs, and sometimes their relations would be good. Sometimes they had issues with neighbors. There was headhunting. There was, people would get wrecked from other countries off of treacherous waters off of Taiwan. They would sometimes they would find that they were not exactly, and yeah, the Dutch arrived in 1624. They had just recently basically acquired the wherewithal to East Asia, and basically everyone that wanted to go to East Asia, it was just a mad rush, and that was what kind of formed or inspired the Dutch government to form the Dutch East Asia Company. So it was it was technically the Dutch that arrived. It was actually the DOC, the Dutch East India Company, and they arrived in Taiwan, which had been to the outside world as Formosa at that time, in 1624. The name Taiwan doesn't actually come from Chinese. So the Dutch arrived in what is now Tainan, southwest of the city, and basically they asked the local Sarayan people what they called that area, and it got written down as something kind of along the lines of something like that, which morphed into Minnan, the language from southern Fujian province across the strait, and then kind of translated into Taiwan in Mandarin. So, so that was the same year, just to give some perspective, that was the same year that Dutch West India Company arrived in Manhattan. Manhattan also being a name that indigenous people gave to the Dutch for where they landed. But so the Dutch basically, when they had tried to dislodge the Portuguese from the first East Asian colony by Europe, to do that. Then they right kind of where it's Formosa, for the pescadores are all known today as Penghu, Penghu County, a small archipelago in the middle of the Taiwan Strait. And the Ming Emperor at the time, this is very late Ming, the Ming Emperor sent a flotilla over there saying to the Dutch, like, this is China. You need to get out, and now. And so the Dutch were like, got it, our bad. And so they went from Penghu just a few, a couple dozen miles over to China. The Ming was fine with it. At that time, no one used the term Taiwan in China. It was Dongfan. It was Eastern barbarians. There had been prior to the Dutch arrival, Chinese people had been to Taiwan, but it was fishermen, pirates, kind of itinerant. It was an expedition where a poet and scholar named Chen, he joined a general that was going to off of the coast of Taiwan, and he wrote the first written kind of like widely accepted account of of Taiwan, and it was basically a Chinese talking in not super flattering terms about the locals, and it's very clear from reading that it was about 1,000 characters. Very clear, that it felt like we're just nothing, nowhere, had no civilization. As the name Eastern barbarians might imply, there was a bit of Han chauvinism going on there, but. We don't know a whole lot about the pre-colonial Taiwan because no one had writing systems until the Dutch showed up. So the first schools in Taiwan were opened by the Dutch, and the first written language, the first written script taught in Taiwan was the Roman alphabet. So it's, again, going back to that, they've always been Chinese. It's like Europeans and indigenous Taiwanese who speak Austronesian languages, and the first language they're using, the first writing system they're using is the Roman alphabet. So really kind of undermines that claim. But the Spanish, they were also present in Taiwan. They arrived. They were only there for a couple of decades, and they landed near the north of Taiwan. And there was some there was some extractive stuff going on, and there was also some proselytizing and whatnot. But mainly they were rivals with the Spanish, with the Dutch, and they wanted to keep an eye on their rivals. And so the Dutch were based, their regional headquarters, basically the VOC's headquarters, were in Batavia, which is now Jakarta, and the Spanish, of course, were in the Philippines. But one of the main things that happened during the Dutch era, aside from the introduction of schools, writing, Christianity, guns, water buffalo, and lots of crops, including mangoes, which is a big deal for Taiwan. But they also, so they wanted indigenous Taiwanese to be laborers on their commercial farms, and the indigenous Taiwanese were not interested in that at all. The Ming Dynasty was kind of collapsing, and you had a bunch of young men on the other side of the strait who were just looking for a way out and looking for just opportunity anywhere. And there was some right across the strait working for the Dutch on commercial farms. So that was kind of the first, that was the beginning of kind of Chinese people coming over from China and actually settling in permanent settlements. But it was adjacent to Dutch plantations and farms and whatnot. It was in 1662 that the Dutch time in Taiwan ended, and that was because they were overthrown by Koxinga, or Zheng Chenggong. And so Zheng Chenggong was the son of a pirate, a Fujianese pirate named Zheng Zhilong, and his mother was Japanese. So it's interesting, like Chinese nationalists will say, Zheng Chenggong, they'll hold him up as this Chinese hero, but they don't like to acknowledge that he was also half Japanese. And he's considered a Ming loyalist, but the degree to how aligned with the Ming he was is arguable, but there was never an official Ming presence in Taiwan. And so the Tungning kingdom, as the Zheng clan's ruling of or colony, I think you could call it, in Taiwan, it only lasted for 3 leaders. Koxinga died just months after overthrowing the Dutch, and was succeeded by his son and grandson. And what is significant about the Tungning is that they actually, this was the beginning of like the Sinicization of Taiwan, where efforts were made to like give local people a Chinese identity. So this is where you get the first Chinese schools, and you get the first Confucian temple, which is in Old Town down Tainan now. They also expanded agriculture, but I think, if you look, holding up Koxinga and the Tungning kingdom as like this, like proof that China has always ruled Taiwan. I mean, the areas that were ruled by the Tungning kingdom are not, not even close. I would say like less than 10% of all of Taiwan. So it was the Qing who really kind of started. They overthrew the Tungning, and the Qing, of course, some people will say they're Chinese, but they were Manchu. And they conquered China. They were not conquered by China, and then they conquered Taiwan, but they didn't conquer all of Taiwan, because I don't know how familiar you are with Taiwan's geography, but basically those colored bits are the parts that are basically flattish. It's a very hilly, mountainous island, but the black and gray portions are steep, jungle-covered, beautiful but treacherous mountains. and as colonialism progressed, indigenous Taiwanese got kind of pushed up into the mountains and away from the plains, although there were plenty of people who are already in the mountains. But so by this time, you're starting to have not necessarily the emergence of a Taiwanese identity, but kind of the seeds of it. And the Qing were definite outsiders. Their customs were foreign even to the Chinese who had come over from Fujian province. They had a difficult time keeping control in Taiwan, and they tended to outsource most of the authority to Taiwanese political elites who were generally of Fujianese extraction. But one of the phrases that came out of the Qing rule of Taiwan was, like every 3 years an uprising, every 5 years a rebellion. So by this time, by the mid 19th century, you've already kind of got this island of people who have mixed in different ways. I mean, keep in mind that the men who came over from Fujian, they came alone. So if they were to find wives, it would be women who were already in Taiwan, which is basically indigenous women. There was some Dutch intermarriage with indigenous people too. So you did have kind of like a swirling gene pool that was different from across the strait and from anywhere else in the world. And it was starting to bristle at outside rule and heavy-handedness from external powers. The Qing didn't really consider Taiwan too important. It was just kind of a node of Fujian province. But after Japan invaded Pingdong briefly, following an indigenous Taiwanese massacre of about 40 or 50 Ryukyuans who had shipwrecked off of Pingdong, there was kind of an awakening in Beijing, and the Qing decided, okay, yeah, we need to administer this as a province. I think that invasion really made Japan feel a lot closer, and there was kind of this waking up to like the geostrategic importance of Taiwan. And but they made it a province in I think they decided to make it a province in 1885. It actually became a province in 1887, and then it was ceded to Japan after Japan defeated the Qing in 1895. And so, but during Qing rule, there were a couple of major waves, bigger than when the Dutch were in Taiwan, waves of migration from China, and they even started kind of curving around to the east side, like up there in Ilan, So the Treaty of Shimonoseki gave Taiwan to Japan. It was basically the Qing surrendering sovereignty of Taiwan to Japan, but for the people who were already in Taiwan and had been living there, they weren't keen to become part of Japan, and so the remnants of the Qing government there kind of formed this republic, declared the foundation of the Republic of Formosa, and they were definitely like Qing aligned and whatnot, but they only lasted about like 3 or 4 months, and they were on the west coast, the coastal plain on the Taiwan Strait side of the island. And what's worth noting is, this was the Imperial Japanese Army that had defeated the Qing, and people were still willing to fight and die. So it's like, this is when you start to really get the sense of like, okay, these people are, there's an us versus them mentality that's developing. So, do people consider themselves Taiwanese? Not necessarily, but it's, there is kind of a growing identity of people on the island, like shared identity. And that got further reinforced with the arrival of the Japanese. And like I said, they subdued the coastal plain very quickly. But it took 20 years to conquer and subdue the mountainous regions where indigenous Taiwanese, who were no strangers to war and fighting, and that's where they lived. And the Japanese military did some pretty. I mean, it was a bloody conquest. 2 decades. And I believe they used sarin gas at one point on indigenous people. I mean, it got pretty brutal. But there was also this other side to it where, Imperial Japan wanted to colonize China, or at least southern China, and then also Southeast Asia. And they basically looked at, so Taiwan was their first colony. They wanted to kind of make it a showcase, like. Let's see if I can say it. I've butchered it every time. It was part of their East Asian Greater Co-Prosperity Sphere, or was greater in there? I can't remember. But basically, it was just like Asia ruled by Asians, but actually by Japanese, and everybody else subordinate to them. So Taiwan, it's unique when compared to other countries in Asia, because it has a generally fond and nostalgic kind of view of Japanese rule, whereas Korea, other countries, Japan or China, obviously, but also Southeast Asian countries really suffered immensely under Japanese rule and conquest. So there were the bad things that Japan did, but they also did improve the quality of life for the majority of at least urban Taiwanese. And so I interviewed Dr. Lin for my book, one of many people I interviewed. But he, as he points out, when the Japanese arrived, most Taiwanese people were illiterate peasants. And 50 years later, when they surrendered and ending World War II, Taiwanese had some of the best education and healthcare in one of the best legal systems in Asia. Taiwanese people could sue Japanese people and potentially win in court. Diseases like cholera and bubonic plague had been eradicated for like 3 decades. But it is worth emphasizing that Taiwanese were denied political representation. They got a little bit more at the end when it was kind of like, oh, we're about to lose the Second World War. I guess we could be a little nicer to the Taiwanese, but it was a bit late. But that was also kind of the benchmark for after the arrival of the Kuomintang in 1945. They had kind of a high bar that they were going to be compared to. But before we get there, let's stay in the Japanese era. Well, so here's one of the more famous Japanese era buildings. It's now the Taiwanese, the ROC Presidential Office building, but this was built by the Japanese at the very beginning of the last century. And there's also a lot of still existing train stations, including Shinju, a very nice train station there. But so one thing that really kind of sets, if you go, so I lived in China before and then I moved to Taiwan, and just like the way things are laid out and the architecture, there's it doesn't really feel so much like China. And buildings, there's not any super old buildings, and most of the old sturdy standing buildings are Japanese era or later. It's and Taiwanese who criticized Japan or challenged Japanese rule, they would get thrown into prison, the Taihoku prison. It's very close to where I live. They built it basically right when they arrived. So they were planning on, they had heard about the troublemaking in Taiwan, and they were ready to throw people into a big prison. It was actually modeled after Eastern Pennsylvania State Penitentiary. So it was the U.S. inspired Taihoku prison, and it was the first. It was a panopticon kind of prison. So it's kind of like there's a hub in the middle and just all these hallways that are kind of like spokes, so that everybody could be monitored. Right. So still in the Japanese era, like one of the more interesting people that I won't say I discovered, but I learned about while researching this book was Xie Wenda. So there's a photo of Xie Wenda. His grandfather had actually fought against the Japanese he was part of the Republic of Formosa that got trounced by the Japanese Imperial Army earlier. But he was a young man from Taichu, as Taichung was known under Japanese rule. When he was in high school, he saw the American. So aviation was like less than 20 years old, like full stop. It was very new. But the American stunt pilot Art Smith went to what is now Taichung, and did some aerobatics. Did cool stuff, flying a plane around. I mean, just seeing a plane was already kind of probably a shock, but then seeing it do that must have been amazing. Anyways, he's in high school and he's like, I want to do that. And his professor, or his high school principal, who's Japanese, I believe, he had connections to the Ito Aviation Academy close to Tokyo. And so through those connections, he was able to go and study and become the first licensed Taiwanese pilot under Japanese rule. And so he was an instant hero. He returned to Taiwan, and the Japanese governor general, who was the head of the Japanese government in Taiwan, he kind of used him to show like the benevolence and coolness of Japanese rule. Look, you guys get to fly planes too, and people loved him. And there was one person, Jiang Weishui. He saw Xie Wenda and he was like, I can use this guy. And so Jiang Weishui, if you don't know who he is, he was a physician, and he had already gone to Tokyo twice to petition for two things. One was greater Taiwanese representation in Taiwan's local government, but also there was no Taiwanese representation in Tokyo, like in the Diet whatsoever. So he was asking for those two things. Like, wasn't trying, there was no one asking for Taiwanese independence. Like those two words had never even like been put together yet. But it was just like, look, can you be a little bit cooler to us? Like we're part of the empire, but like we're human beings too. And both times Jiang Weishui's petitions were rejected. So he was going to go a third time, and before he did that, he approached Xie Wenda, and they kind of they ended up cooperating. So Jiang Weishui crowdfunded enough money, and I have no idea. I was unable to find out like how much money and like what it would translate to in like current US dollars. But I mean, planes back then, first of all, probably not easy to get and probably pretty expensive. But Taiwanese people crowdfunded enough money to buy a plane for Xie Wenda, who was like in his early 20s. Like, also, you buy a plane and like give it to someone that young. I don't know. It seems a bit risky, but it was christened the Taipei, and so when Jiang Weishui went to petition for the third time for greater representation for Taiwanese people in the local and imperial government, when he was in Tokyo, Xie Wenda and a buddy whose name we don't know, they flew over downtown Tokyo and dropped leaflets basically saying, like, you guys think you're so civilized, yet you treat us like this, just trying to appeal to their better angels, right? And saying, you've got this constitution, but we're treated as like, subhuman compared to you. And that must have been a jolt, because I mean, this is that was 1923. So like, the Imperial Japanese Imperial Japan is it's starting to really feel and show its strength. So it was a very bold move. He flew back to Taipei, and that same Japanese governor general that had been like, that a boy, that's a good kid. His mood had changed, and he was like, are you trying to overthrow us, or what's going on? He allowed Xie Wenda to leave the governor general building, which we had seen earlier. And Xie Wenda, like, I think he probably just thought like, I'm kind of lucky to be alive. And so he flew to China. And so, he had never lived in the Republic of China, but he went over across the strait and would eventually return with the Republic of China when it arrived in the 40s in Taiwan. And so that brings us to the 40s. So that's these two gentlemen. On the left, that's Jiang Jingguo, and on the right, that's his father, Chiang Kai-shek. And at this point, so with the surrender of Japan, the U.S. basically brought ROC soldiers, and at this time, the ROC was basically a Kuomintang, Chinese Nationalist Party, KMT, whatever you want to say, but a KMT party state, right? Like the state and the party were basically the same thing. There were no other parties, and they weren't allowed. But so from 1945 to 1949, these are the only 4 years in all of human history in which a Chinese government that identified as Chinese controlled all of Taiwan. So, a China-based government, right? So, Koxinga doesn't count, the Qing don't count. They didn't think of themselves as Chinese, although they did present themselves as Chinese when ruling Chinese people. So yeah, when the arrival of the ROC was a bit jarring for Taiwanese people, because first of all, they were like, wow, these guys defeated the Japanese Imperial Army. They must be very powerful and formidable, and they were not quite what Taiwanese people had expected. They were poorly paid. They had very little discipline, and they were basically, they didn't even want to get off the American boats in 1945 because they knew there were tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers who were standing down but still like in Taiwan, and it was very obvious to Taiwanese people from the beginning that the U.S. was the power behind the ROC and the KMT. Without the U.S.'s help, Japan wouldn't have been defeated. And so rather than do it the Qing way, the Manchu way, and speak to people, everyone in cities in 1945 basically spoke Japanese as their daily language, and then at home maybe they're speaking Minnanyu or Hakka or some sort of indigenous language, but nobody really spoke Mandarin. And then the ROC shows up in 1945, and it's just like, we're just going to speak to you in Mandarin. Even though the first Governor General, Chen Yi, he spoke fluent Japanese. Chiang Kai-shek spoke fluent Japanese. So very quickly, it's kind of like, that's going to feel like, all right, these are outside. It's another outsider, kind of power coming in and telling us what to do. And there was, from the beginning, from like the lowest level of the ROC military all the way up to the generals in the ROC military, there was just kind of people just took whatever they could. And so for generals, it was mansions and monopolies and businesses and whatever else they could justify. And for unpaid or poorly paid soldiers, they were just stripping Taiwan for parts. And at this time, Taiwan got a nickname in China. People had heard about it. Taiwan was very, it wasn't populated as densely as the rest of Asia. There was about 5-6 million people on an island that now has 24 million people. And, it hadn't really been touched by the war that much. Towards the end, in 1945, the U.S. led some Allied bombing raids. They were primarily aimed at critical infrastructure, military infrastructure, and other things. Train lines, ports, and whatnot. They also bombed Japanese civilian areas like Zhongshan, the Zhongshan area in Taipei. But overall, Taiwan had kind of gotten through World War II unscathed, relatively unscathed compared to the rest of Asia. But it became known in China as Baoda, like a treasure island, and that was because of the relative wealth there, and I think also just that it was sounded like it was pretty easy to take. But so this was really kind of, Taiwanese people were not enjoying. They kind of lost respect for their new overlords within a month or two, and things built up quite a bit in that first year and a half. You had basically the Japanese quarantine system that had been put in place and kept diseases out. The KMT just ignored it; they didn't care. And so whoever wanted to come over from China could, and they wouldn't be screened or quarantined. And so you had the return of cholera and the return of bubonic plague to Taiwan, and people didn't like that. There was also hyperinflation. The price of rice went up. In that's like bread lines in Western countries. Expensive. And Taiwan had never had expensive rice. It was in that sense it was a land of plenty, and so the mismanagement was very grating to Taiwanese people. And in early 1947, there was an incident outside of a tea house, the Tianma Tea House, or the Pegasus Tea House, near Dadaocheng in Taipei, where a woman selling cigarettes that were not part of the monopoly, the former Japanese monopoly that the KMT had taken over in Taiwan. They were actually smuggled cigarettes from China. A Taiwanese woman was selling smuggled Chinese cigarettes outside the Pegasus Tea House. 2 customs officers came up and tried to confiscate her cigarettes. She wouldn't let go. One of them pistol whipped her in the face. She was bleeding, and people who were outside the tea house saw it, and they were very upset. They encircled the customs agents, the customs officers, and one of the officers drew his pistol, shot into the crowd, hitting a man in the belly who would later die that night. But that scattered the crowd. Those 2 officers hightailed it at the closest Paichuso, or like a police station, and where they received protection. An angry crowd was dispersed by the police eventually, but then the next day, a much bigger crowd marched on the administrative center of Taipei, and they in the beginning it was just chanting and drums and angry shouting and whatnot. But when they came across the first customs office, so very close to Taipei main station, if you're familiar with Taipei at all, they started killing Chinese people. They started overthrowing, overturning cars, setting bonfires, just kind of running. They were rioting and killing Chinese people. And so they kind of moved on from there, and they made their way to the Executive Yuan, where they were going to present a petition asking for not for independence, but just for reforms to ROC rule of Taiwan. And they were shot at. They were strafed by machine guns that were manned by KMT, by ROC soldiers on top of what is now the Executive Yuan. And then, so there was only one radio station in all of Taiwan at that time. It had been built by the Japanese, and so like initially it was all in Japanese, and then when the KMT arrived, it started broadcasting in Mandarin only, and was probably a very good way to learn the new lingua franca under ROC rule. But everybody listened to it, and some quick thinking people from that crowd that got shot at, broke into the radio station, took it over, and spoke in Taiwanese, or like the Taiwanese dialect of or variant of Minanyu, and basically told everyone in the island, who had a radio station or radio, basically what had happened, and basically called, for overthrow of the KMT, and rise up, right? And so within the next 2 days, that's what happened. Taiwanese people, they killed Chinese people. Eventually, like Taiwanese political elites were like, we've got to police ourselves. But the KMT and the ROC military mostly retreated to their barracks and kind of they were hiding out away. But you had basically like a week where like the Republic of China had been effectively overthrown by Taiwanese people, and those Taiwanese political elites that I mentioned, they were kind of caught in between this, angry Taiwanese people and then, the powerful ROC. But the ROC military, there wasn't a very large presence there yet, And that would change after a week. Chen Yi, the governor general, had sent a message to Chiang Kai-shek requesting reinforcements. Chiang Kai-shek approved them, and they were sent to basically Keelung in the north, the major port in the north, and Kaohsiung, the major port in the south. And as soon as they arrived, they just went on a rampage. And they also, during that week, there were these like kind of associations that the Taiwanese political elites and people who wanted to help, like kind of with negotiations with the ROC government, they had formed these associations in every city, and these name lists for all the associations basically became death lists, and it was or like hit lists. And so there was within like 3 weeks, the KMT or ROC soldiers had killed. I think it's a conservative number, but 28,000 people. And it was so there was, and it was basically like amongst them was an entire generation of people who could have been leaders of an independent Taiwanese state. And there were a lot of Taiwanese people who, at the time, because there was a big American presence in Taiwan. And the UN had just been founded, and the ROC was the first signatory of the UN Charter. But the U.S., prior to the arrival of the ROC, it had dropped, kind of taking a page from Xie Wenda's book, dropped a bunch of leaflets on Taiwan and telling Taiwanese people, you're going to build a new China. It's going to be great. You're going to have freedom of speech. You're going to be able to, vote for your leaders, and you're going to have democracy. It's going to be amazing. And like none of that had happened, but there was still this hope that the U.S. would help. And the U.S., unfortunately for Taiwanese people, had basically the State Department had decided, all right, Taiwan's China now, because there was the Cold War was just starting up, and it was like the ROC was an important ally of the U.S. at that time. But so that was a big. That was kind of the fundamental, I think, the moment where you kind of have the birth of modern, Taiwan was modernized, like industrialized by Japan, and it was set up by Japan. But in terms of the political identity that you have today in Taiwan, this blue, which is like identifying as Chinese, and kind of the biggest blue party is the KMT, who's still active today, and then green, which is Taiwanese identifying people. This is kind of where that all kind of springs out of, and I think the massacres in 1947, because that initial uprising took place on February 28th, the second month, right? So it's generally kind of in shorthand, it's referred to as Arba. 228. So, just a couple years after 228, the Chiangs flew out of China for the last time, escaping to Taiwan with the rest of the Republic of China government, or at least whatever could be brought over. And a lot of Chinese refugees who were heavily traumatized both by World War II and the Chinese Civil War. And so then you had about 1 to 2 million heavily traumatized Chinese, kind of moving over and, setting up kind of encampments in amongst, 5 million heavily traumatized Taiwanese. And Chiang Kai-shek and his son, they went up to what is now the top of what is now Yangmingshan, but back before that it was called, before it was renamed Yangmingshan by Chiang, who named him after one of his favorite Zhejiangese philosopher warriors. It was called Caoshan, like Grass Mountain. He just lived above it all. They lived above it all, and he would go down to do government stuff, but he lived up on the mountain initially. And you had these two very different people with just different identities that suddenly had to live together, and it was not easy. And also 1949, when they arrived, that was also the beginning of martial law, and it would last until 1987. So that was the longest period of martial law in human history until Syria broke the record in 2011. And so whereas 228 was mostly just kind of killing people, martial law, which would later be called known as the White Terror, it started off with a lot of killing. But it didn't just target it. It was kind of two-pronged. Of course, any calls for the overthrow of the ROC and KMT by Taiwanese would be repressed, and anybody connected to anything like that would, they would be dealt with, usually executed in the beginning, although things became a little less bloody afterwards, but still, brutal martial law. But then you also had this paranoia. I mean, so a big part of the reason that Chiang Kai-shek lost China was because generals had defected to the communist side, and all these Chinese people came over with the ROC, and you can't tell who's a communist spy and who isn't. So it was there was a lot of paranoia towards Chinese people as well. So this isn't just about Taiwanese people suffering; it's also about Chinese people suffering at the hands of the Republic of China. And so the things would progress, and the Republic of China stopped. It became it wasn't just a little rump state that was saying it was the rightful government of all of China. It was also becoming increasingly paranoid and cut off from the rest of the world. And a huge turning point in terms of like the ROC PRC story is 1971, when Chiang Kai-shek basically knew that he was going to get voted out of the UN, that the ROC would be kicked out of the UN. He pulled out first. You can't fire me, I quit, that kind of thing. Which for Jiang Jingguo, who was the heir apparent, he was not very pleased. He was different. He had headed his father's security services, so he knew how the sausage was made, but he also, I think, had a different style. I think Chiang Kai-shek had a bit more of an emperor's approach to rule, and Jiang Jingguo was, I think, he was a bit more pragmatic in certain ways. But the U.S. and a few other countries had pushed for a decade or more. They had pushed like this notion of like, how about you give up the UN Security Council seat for China and the veto that comes with that, and you get a General Assembly seat that's called Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek was having none of that. But Jiang Jingguo saw the value in that and attempted to persuade his father to take the better deal, and which would have been a better deal for him, and made him a less weakened ruler once his father passed away in the 70s. But Chiang Kai-shek rejected that. And so Chiang Kai-shek passed away in 1975. The Jiang Jingguo era began, and things were very different. The KMT was old. There was going to have to be an attempt to Taiwanify the KMT, or KMTify Taiwanese people. But basically, one of the things that Jiang Jingguo did was promote native Taiwanese, not indigenous, but Taiwan-born leaders, and he did this. In the backdrop of this, you have the U.S. eventually. Jimmy Carter decided to, and this was, it kind of started with the Nixon and Kissinger visit to China in 1972, and basically the U.S. government was like looking at China as a way to maybe hedge against, like maybe you could team up against the Soviets, right? And the Soviets and the PRC had already had a big falling out and almost went to war. So, and this wasn't giving up. This wasn't abandoning democratic Taiwan. It was abandoning, kind of an ROC that felt like kind of like North Korea today. So either side of the Taiwan Strait was very repressive and a difficult place to live. So it wasn't really, like in that sense, it wasn't like abandoning your democratic partner or anything like that. But the U.S. switched recognition of the government of China from the ROC in Taipei to the PRC in Beijing. And less than a decade later, Jiang Jingguo announced he would end martial law. And shortly after that, he passed away. And that led to the arrival of the first Taiwan-born leader of Taiwan, like under anyone's rule, Li Donghui. And on the left, you've got a photo of Li Donghui as a young man under Japanese colonial rule. He's in a kendo outfit, I believe. He was from he's from the north of Taiwan, and I had the great fortune of being the last person to interview him before he passed away. And I mean, he was, I think, he was somewhere between, he was like either late 90s or like 100, or because I also interviewed Su Beng as well. I can't quite remember who was what age, but basically like 100 years old, right? And so one thing I asked him, like, what was the most important thing that you did as president, in your opinion? And I thought it would be delivering democracy to Taiwan, which he did in the 90s. And he said, no, it was nationalizing the ROC military. So the Republic of China military today swears allegiance to the country and to the Constitution. But just like the People's Liberation Army is the armed wing of the CCP in China, it was a very similar setup where the ROC military was the armed wing of the KMT. So this nationalization of the ROC military really kind of, without it, you couldn't have had democratization. But democratization really kind of became possible with the 1990 Wild Lily protests. So just several months after Tiananmen and the tragedy, connected to that in China, there were student protests in the center of the city, in the big square in the center of the city, and instead of everybody getting mowed down with gunfire, rolled over by tanks, Li Denghui, they were protesting Li Denghui's election. He had been elected by just a few hundred KMT members, and they were like, no, that's not an election. You didn't get elected. You got chosen by a party who has a monopoly on power. We want a real election. We want to elect our own president, like for real. And anyways, he invited 53 student leaders into his office at the presidential office building. He was basically like, what do you guys need? And they told him what they wanted. And he's like, okay, sounds good. How about legislative elections in 1992 and presidential elections in 1996? And they were kind of like, is this for real? But they were like, okay, sounds good. And they called off the protests, and that's what ended up happening. And so Li Denghui, he had been president for 8 years, like kind of non-democratic president. But after 8 years, he was in the first election, in presidential election in Taiwan. He actually won. He defeated Peng Mingmin and a few others. But yeah, this is, and Li Denghui started, one thing he really promoted was this kind of idea of a new Taiwanese identity. And I think it was the kind of the beginning, rather than just like a straight blue-green thing. It was kind of like, let's kind of have a bigger tent, like new Taiwanese identity. So that's where you're like, you can be, you can think of yourself as primarily Chinese and you're primarily Taiwanese, but together we're Taiwanese in our own way. And this is kind of a new thing. But he really tried to establish democracy and freedom as kind of part of this new Taiwanese identity. And he invited the Dalai Lama to open up a representative office in Taipei, which is still going on today. In 2000, he was succeeded by Chen Shui-bian. And this is one of those flukes of, not flukes, but just like one of those moments in Taiwanese history where it really probably shouldn't have worked out this way. But Li Denghui, he picked, so as the head of the KMT, he had the authority to pick who the 2000 candidate for the KMT would be. And he chose the relatively unpopular Lian Zhan rather than James Song, who would have just won in a landslide. James Song, who had helped convince people in the KMT that Li Denghui should succeed Jiang Jingguo, because there were people that had doubts. They were like, I don't know about letting Taiwanese people run the show, like Taiwanese-born people. They didn't trust them, and maybe they had good reason to. I mean, but basically, James Song decided to run as an independent. So then, KMT or blue voters had a kind of a dilemma. It's like, if you're just like, I do whatever the party says, okay, you vote for Lian Zhan and the KMT. But if you're like, I think James Song is the better candidate, you vote for James Song. Enough people voted in a way where it split the blue vote just enough so that Chen Shui-bian and Annette Lu could slip through. And so now you have, they were candidates with for the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which grew out of like the anti-KMT movement known as the Dangwai movement in the 70s and 80s. But it was founded 1 year before. They were technically illegal as a party when they founded founded themselves in 1986. It was 1987 when martial law ended and it was legal to be the DPP. But so that was a massive victory for Taiwanese self-determination from the Green perspective. And so this is Chen Shui-bian and his wife Wu Shuzhen, and so it's a very like loving photo right there. But she was actually paralyzed. She had been hit and then like kind of run over by like a tractor truck type thing when Chen Shui-bian was he had lost an election attempt. He was running for a city councilor in Tainan, and when he and his wife were going around thanking voters for their support, she got hit by this guy who just kind of came out of nowhere and then backed over and then ran over again. And well, there's a lot of things like this that happened during KMT, like martial law and whatnot. And there's no proof that it was done by the KMT, but there are a lot of things that the KMT did that were kind of along these lines. So people on the Green side tend to think that this was deliberate. Anyway, so Chen Shui-bian got reelected in 2004, and I think in the beginning, I think the KMT and the Blues kind of thought, all right, this is a fluke, right? We split the vote, but he ran against a unified Blue ticket and still won. And I think after that election, that was when both the KMT and the Chinese Communist Party were like, all right, this Taiwanese identity thing is getting out of control, right? And democracy is making it worse. And so that was when you had the beginning of, so 2005, both Lian Zhan and James Song went to China, and KMT CCP ties party-to-party ties were normalized. So they stopped being Cold War enemies and started becoming more cooperative. And that process has gained momentum over the last 2 decades, and is stronger than ever now. So, but at the end of Chen Shui-bian's time as president, he came under accusations of accepting bribes, laundering money, and his wife was accused of taking bribes as well. And it's really hard to say like how much of it is politically driven and how much of it was actual corruption, because it's the legal wording is. I've spoken to lawyers about it, and they're kind of like, it feels like it was politically driven, but also you could make a legal case for it. So without getting into the details of that, Chen Shui-bian steps down as president, and he almost immediately, like he's not allowed to leave Taiwan anymore, and he ends up going to prison for corruption. And he attempted to commit suicide while he was in prison. He really kind of, his mental and physical health deteriorated. The next president of Taiwan, of the ROC, was Ma Ying-jeou on the left, who's shaking hands with Xi Jinping there. And Ma had campaigned on a like, let Taiwanese decide Taiwan's future kind of platform. But as soon as he became president, he's a good-looking, charismatic former mayor of Taipei. A lot of people liked him, and believed that he was going to be open to the changes that had been occurring. But he just almost immediately, like one of the first things he did is have Chen Yunlin, a top CCP official, visit Taiwan. That kicked off the Wild Strawberry movement. But I mean, even ROC flags were not allowed to be displayed in public when this official from Beijing was in town. So it was, that really set off the alarms for red flags for a lot of Taiwanese people. And he ended up getting reelected in 2012, and maybe within the next year, the KMT in Shanghai had negotiated this cross-strait services trade agreement, which basically would have opened up all of Taiwan's service sector, which was 60% of GDP, to investment from China. So what it effectively would have done is it would have enabled China to just buy Taiwan rather than invade it, right? And also there were loosening of regulations on media that had happened before that, and that's when you have a lot of like kind of KMT, blue media, kind of becoming closer and closer to a red, a CCP message. But in 2014, the CSSTA was signed by the KMT and CCP in Shanghai, and then Ma's party, the KMT, tried to ram it through the legislature, and young Taiwanese people occupied the legislature, and they basically derailed this attempt to open up Taiwan's economy to Chinese money. I mean, I've spoken to lots of people who are just like, that was actually, it doesn't get as much credit in public as it deserves, but like, or in like the narrative about Taiwan. But I mean, this was basically like China almost had a way of basically just like annexing Taiwan with money, and it was stopped by the protesters in 2014. And a lot of those protesters are now in the government. You have Lin Feifan, who's the deputy national security, this deputy secretary general of the National Security Council now. But you also have Huang Guochang, who is the chair of the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, which is now in an alliance with the KMT. Following 8 years of Ma Ying-jeou, you get Tsai Ing-wen, and so she, because of the state in which the DPP had been left following the 8 years of Chen Shui-bian, like the U.S., but also other countries and also Taiwanese voters didn't really trust the DPP that much. And she was kind of, in some ways, I think, the perfect person for this job, which was to reestablish trust in the DPP, both with Taiwanese voters and with Washington. And she very much did that, I would say. On the left, that's her speaking on the phone with President-elect Donald Trump in 2016. And so that was the first article I wrote for the New York Times news desk. I'd done some like features for them before, but they didn't have anybody permanent in Taiwan at the time, and they had run the Sky is Falling pieces from both Beijing and Washington. And then some editor somewhere in the system was like, wait, it's the Taiwanese president, right? And they called Trump. Should we like get a report from like Taiwan maybe? So I got called up, and I spoke to old, young, male, female, wealthy, less well off, and blue and green people, as many as I could in like a day, and everybody said the same thing. I don't trust Donald Trump, but it sure is nice to have our existence acknowledged, right? Because Taiwan, there's what are called the 3 T's when dealing with China, right? Tibet, Tiananmen, and Taiwan, right? You just don't bring that stuff up. So Taiwan, it's not in most international organizations. It's basically only in like APEC and the WTO. It's not in the UN or any of the affiliated UN organizations. And it had just kind of become invisible, even though you have this both it's a major economy. It's the kind of middle power that Mark Carney was kind of addressing at Davos earlier this year in his big speech. Although I don't think he had Taiwan in mind, but and also it had emerged as a tech powerhouse. So it's important in terms of both principles and pragmatism, which he had talked about. But another thing that Tsai did while she was in power, while she was president. So one of the first things she did was she apologized to indigenous people on behalf of the ROC government, which was a pretty big thing. There's nothing like that that's happened in Asia. She also she wasn't involved in it, but she, during her first term, basically Taiwan became the first Asian country to pass or to legalize same-sex marriage. Not quite marriage equality, but legalized same-sex marriage, kind of a separate but equal thing. But it's still that was a story. I think the first story I wrote where it was just a pure Taiwan story. There was no China element to it whatsoever. And that was refreshing. But she also recognized the need to build up the ROC armed forces, which had been largely neglected by Ma during his 8 years. And and so she was very lucky. She had for all 8 years that she was president, she had her own party was in control of the legislature. And but you know, at the beginning of that, yeah, it's like kind of all right. This is a new thing. But after 8 years of that, the DPP had become the establishment party. And while people trust Taiwanese people, voters trust the DPP more when it comes to national security and cross-strait stuff, they like. I mean, in my experience, I feel like there's people will punish vote, you know, where it's like, you know, I don't want to vote. I'm going to vote for the other party because I think you need to do a better job. And we saw that, I think, in 2018 with Han Kuo-yu and winning the mayorship in Kaohsiung, but also in the 2024 elections, the KMT with the TPP, they had enough seats to achieve a majority coalition. So the new president, that's him on the left, Lai Ching-te, relatively new now, and that's half American, half Taiwanese. I mean, she revoked her American citizenship to run for office, but that's Xiaobi Kim, the vice president on the right. They won the third DPP presidency in a row, so that was a big victory for the DPP. But they lost the legislature. And so then the KMT had a kind of a new lever of power that it hadn't had for some good time. And on the left here, on this image on the right, that's also in the Great Hall of the People. You've got Fu Kunqi, who's a legislator from Hualien, and he's the head of the KMT Legislative Caucus. He one of the first things he did after the new legislature went into session was he led a delegation of 17 KMT lawmakers to meet with Wang Huning, who's on the Politburo Standing Committee, and is basically Xi Jinping has given him like the Taiwan portfolio to handle. And as soon as they came back or went back to Taipei, the KMT started proposing and passing some of them, proposing just very bills that are hard not to see as being kind of detrimental to the democracy of the ROC government, but also very, very much working in favor of Beijing's goals in Taiwan. And that's where we are right now. Basically, there's you've got kind of this deadlock between the executive and legislative branches. The KMT led coalition was unwilling to pass the previous budget that the Lai administration had put forth, and Lai has also like, because of the threat from China and how rapidly it's evolving, Lai had earmarked $40 billion over like 8 years for a special defense budget that would build like this. One of the big things is kind of like an Iron Dome type thing that he called T-Dome. But anyways. Yeah, that's being blocked. There's drama with the Constitutional Court, but basically you have an executive branch that really doesn't have a whole lot it can concede and stay true to its principles, and an executive branch or a legislative branch that seems to be kind of bent on obstructing and slowing things down, and that's where we are for at least the next. The next national election will be January 2028. So this is kind of what we have to look forward to until then. And with that, I will thank you for your patience. And yeah. Well, let's go to the QR code. Anyways, that's all for that. And it's really understanding Taiwan's story and who's been in charge of it that makes it easier to talk about things, whether it's like semiconductors or the possibility of war or anything like that. But that's the end of my little presentation, and let's please open up to questions.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the presentation. Those of you who are joining online, my apologies. I think there are some technical difficulties early on, but everything seems like it's working now. Please leave your questions in the Q&A section in the comment section of YouTube, and I'll be able to read those out loud. So I'd like to open it up to our audience. Any questions for Chris? Ping, go ahead.
What is the KMT's vision for a Taiwan that where they would, if they were to control the executive and the legislature, what is their vision for how Taiwan would be? How would it be different from Hong Kong? Or really, how would it be different from being in the mainland?
Let me just repeat the question. So the question is, if the KMT were to come to power in both the LY, legislative yuan, and the presidency, what is their vision for Taiwan?
Well, I can't speak for the KMT. I don't know what their thoughts are. I mean, as you saw with Ma Ying-jeou, he was saying one thing while campaigning and then kind of doing something different once he was president. But there was recently a KMT leadership change. The new chair is the second woman now to be KMT chair. Her name's Zheng Liwen, and she was considered an underdog a few months ago when the KMT held its leadership vote, and she ended up outperforming everybody. Like kind of traditional like establishment KMT candidates. And at one point, Zhao Shaokang, who's kind of amongst the establishment folks, he said to reporters, hey, Beijing, if you're listening, can you stop interfering with our internal election, our party election? So like that's when even within the KMT, there's kind of an acknowledgement, or at least an accusation that the CCP is interfering in their own electoral politics. But so Zheng Liwen won, and she is unabashedly, she's interesting because she used to be deep green. She used to be pro-Taiwanese independence. And now she's deep blue, and she's pro-unification. And she espouses a Chinese identity. And she's basically like, Taiwanese people need to be proud of being Chinese. We speak Chinese, we eat with chopsticks, we eat Chinese food. We consume Chinese entertainment, and so there's very much this, this very, and it feels like she's a bit ahead of, or like out in front of the average KMT voter. But things are pretty polarized right now. And I think you have there's like, it's very much just kind of like a team thing going on, right? And so you got the TPP, and the KMT on one side and the DPP on the other side. And it's really hard to say what exactly they want to do. But one thing that, I do think there is a good possibility that the next election could go to some sort of Lambai-he, right? Where you've got the blue, so the KMT and the TPP uniting. They tried before and it didn't work, but if you get Lu Shouyan or Jiang Wanan or somebody, one of the more popular KMT figures as presidential candidate, and then maybe someone like Huang Guochang is from the TPP as the vice presidential candidate. People, I think, I think there is DPP fatigue in Taiwan, but I think also there's a lot of people. I have heard from people who, they didn't vote for the DPP this last time, and they don't like the DPP, but they also don't like this government deadlock that's going on right now. But it does seem like the coordination between the KMT and the CCP, they're meeting more and more and at higher and higher levels. So it just feels like while the KMT still has agency, its goals and the things it's doing, they're really starting to dovetail more and more with the CCP's goals.
But do the people of Taiwan, independent of DPP, KMT, do they buy living in a society that they see is going on in Hong Kong? Is that they really would sign up for that?
Well, I think like the one country, two systems thing is it's pretty unappealing to most Taiwanese, and it's worth noting here that you've got but
Hong Kong doesn't have two systems anymore.
Right. But officially it does, right? and also a lot of people, especially like in the countryside, maybe they don't go to Hong Kong. But one of the things that's being pushed by Zheng Liwen and by like influencers, many of who have been going over to China and then coming back like way more pro-China, like Holger Chun, Zhang Guan, right? Guangzhou, yeah, Guangzhou, and then a few others. You know, there's this new narrative where it's not about like, you know, the glory of the PRC or anything like that. It's just like, all right, you've got Taiwan, you've got one choice: Ukraine or Hong Kong. What are you going to take? You know, and that's, well, that's a false binary. But if that's the kind of thing that people, you know, if people reduce the current plight of Taiwan to like, you know, well, we get to lose our rights and freedoms, but you know, we can make money, or you know, we suffer awful war and invasion. You know, it's if those really are the only two choices, then it's you know, it's tough. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, the U.S. The first Trump administration was quite popular in Taiwan, but the second one, it's a little bit different. You know, like the tariffs and just kind of the approach of the Trump administration to Ukraine. You know, it really I think it's really undermined a lot of Taiwanese faith in the U.S. But things are also changing in a different way, like regionally. I think that you've got Japan and the Philippines, who are also kind of like, well, if Taiwan becomes PRC, then like we're in a tight spot, you know. And so there, you know, so hence you get Prime Minister Takaichi saying, you know, if there's a problem for Taiwan, that's a problem for Japan, and we might have to do something about that. And even though China acted, you know, all surprised and shocked, everybody knows this. You know, it was like the big red line she crossed wasn't. It was saying it out loud as prime minister, right? But now the cat's out of the bag, and now it's like, you know, that red line has been crossed forever. And so you've got Japan and the Philippines are really getting closer to each other, and they're getting closer to Taipei. So this is, you know, historically, rather than a NATO type situation, you've got this hub and spokes thing where it's like, you know, Asian democracies in what we call the first island chain, you know, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. They all have their agreements, their defense partnerships with the U.S., but not really with each other. And you know, the Philippines and Japan are like, we need to like coordinate more with each other. And so in September, a reciprocal access agreement went into effect that allows either country to like station troops or military hardware in each other's territory. And it's worth noting that, like, you know, the closest bits of Filipino and Japanese territory to Taiwan are just as close as like the Fujian coast is to Taiwan. So you know, and I think there's just a general understanding that like if Xi Jinping were to push the button and try to invade and take Taiwan, that it would spill over into those two neighboring countries and potentially Guam as well.
Can you elaborate about the military exercises in that area?
There's been a hand up. Let me, I'll take two questions at a time then. So Catherine.
Yeah, I actually have two questions, like just building off of what you were just talking about, because yesterday I just listened to the Economist podcast and interviewing Chile. And what's your take on her sort of, especially her perception among young people in Taiwan, because they were saying how like in modernist Taiwan, it seems it's like easier to, you know, come out as gay versus like coming out as like part of the KMT party. The second question is like, what's her take on her sort of main argument of like cutting budget cuts for like military defense, especially because I feel like Trump has been trying to pressure Taiwan to increase their military budget, versus, but like her sort of main policy like argument is like, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna argue with the CCP and trying to like basically somehow argue our way out of this.
So let me just repeat the questions very quickly. So the first question is about youth perspectives of, I guess, Tungning, as well as perspectives towards China. Second is about the policy of the KMT towards defense and defense spending priorities. And then go ahead and ask your question just one more time.
I'm sorry. I'm just interested in the heightened exercises in the East China Sea. And I think recently the Japanese self-defense force transferred air defense, I believe, to Yonaguni. And there's, individual fishermen from Miyako that go off and stand off with the Chinese naval defenses, and so there's all these like little, not skirmishes, but
Friction.
thank you.
So yeah, a question about kind of defense exercises as well as these shifts in Japanese defense policy. Posturing, that's a good term. And just keeping in mind the time, if you could
Okay.
keep in mind the time, we have some more questions coming in from online.
All right. So, Catherine, was it? Yeah. So the first question coming out is KMT, I guess. Yeah. I mean, so when I first arrived 10 years ago in Taiwan, it just seemed like Taiwanese, like the KMT was just very much an older people's party, and like even in 2018, when I went to a Hanguoyu rally, like his last rally, I was trying to find like someone under 40, and every time I saw someone who looked like they were under 40, I'm like, hey, I'm a journalist, can I ask you a few questions? She's like, oh, I'm like here with my parents, like don't talk to me, you know. But there is a frustration, you know, like, so it must, you know, like it must be pointed out that you know, while per capita GDP now exceeds Japan, you know, just because like TSMC is doing well doesn't mean the average Taiwanese person is. The cost of living has gone up steadily for I mean, this is happening everywhere for like the last 2 decades, and wages have largely been stagnant. So, you know, yeah, people care about China, but also people care about being able to survive, like just, you know, in their daily lives. So, and if you think about it, like, you know, there's like what, people who are like 20 now, you know, basically the entire time that they've been politically aware, it's been like the DPP in charge of stuff, you know. So it's like, for a lot of people, young people, they haven't delivered enough. Does that mean that they want to be part of China? No, but the KMT are thought of as like this opposition party, this alternative to the establishment, right? And you know, a lot of people weren't really that old when, you know, younger voters weren't that old when Sunflower happened. So. And there's no living memory of martial law or, you know, even like the Ma era. So it's I think there's a lot to that. Also, there's you know, there's a lot of disinformation going on, especially like in line chat groups, but like online stuff and YouTubers. So there's a lot of different factors to that. But it's, you know, I think there is kind of like less of a taboo for young people to at least kind of lean blue now, but it doesn't mean that they want to be part of the PRC. I think approval, according to the Zhengda like polls, you know, there's 3% of Taiwanese people like think that they are like Chinese and Chinese only, and there's also 3% that are like, let's become part of the PRC today. So I think that's correlated. And sorry, what's the second one?
Regarding.
Oh yeah, well yeah, connected to that, yeah. I mean, so I think, you know, the KMT is like, we want to be transparent, despite the fact that they had done that negotiating the CCSTA in, you know, kind of in secret across the strait with the CCP. But and they're also like, you know, I think she's said a few times, look, we're not an ATM, we're not a cash machine for the US. She's also accusing the US of like trying to steal TSMC, but TSMC isn't relocating to the US, it's just building new fabs. TSMC can't make enough chips to meet demand. But it's very much a situation where you have like so many different narratives going on, and I think it's they want to look responsible. But right now, you know, if you're kind of coordinating with the country that's threatening to, you know, destroy your democracy, and then you're also like, let's spend less on the military. I don't know. I'm not a Taiwanese voter, but if I were, I think I know how I would vote. And so, moving on to your question about the exercises, it's salami slicing, right? I mean, the noose is tightening, getting closer and closer. And every exercise, and I think there's going to be 2 or 3 this year probably. I mean, it seems to be kind of like on a fairly regular schedule, regardless of who gets fired at the top of the PLA. The general who's head of Eastern Theater Command for the Justice Mission 2025.
Right.
At the end of December, he had only had that position for 1 week. So Xi Jinping doesn't care about testing people. You know, the People's Liberation Army has built up, it's the biggest peacetime naval buildup in all of human history. And it's all very much developed for amphibious warfare and invasion. It's not hard to figure out like what it's, and they say it, you know, this is all about modernizing so we can complete the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation, or the great rejuvenation. So but you know, they've got all these new toys, but they haven't used them. So, you know, like I think there is, you know, this isn't just about like psychological warfare. It's also about like getting the military ready. And so there's a lot of both of those things going on.
We have 4 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 more questions. Okay, 3 more questions. You're going to have to like a minute each to
All right.
respond. So Jason, Michael, and then, yeah, so these 3 questions. I apologize to our online audience. We have questions, but we just won't get to them.
So to pile on to, you know, Joint Sword, A and B, and all the PLA operations, and looking at how the PLA overreach, Second Thomas Shoals, the Senkakus, how is that affecting the younger generation's will to fight if China does go over there? I mean, what have you seen? Have you seen anything change in the past few years? If, you know, you talked about, you know, do we make money, or, you know, do we and not have our rights, or do we go to Ukraine?
Okay, so
Let's take all the questions together, just because we really don't have much time left. Sorry, Chris.
Okay.
Michael, go ahead.
So I actually had a question about American publishing and the difficulty that it seems to be for people to tell a full-throated story about Taiwan. I remember John Oliver had his report about Taiwan. It was like the first time in a long time that I had seen something that wasn't about China and Taiwan or U.S. interest in TMC. And he talked about all the complexity that is Taiwan. And you're going through this whole thing, but you're speaking to a very educated audience here. I'm just curious how your editors, you don't have to lose your job, but how your editors,
I don't have one.
how your editors deal with this multifaceted, complex, fascinating place, and all they want is something about Xiaolongbao or you know,
Alex Holland.
yeah, I don't know, just very shallow, banal kinds of things, or it's about warfare. So,
And then Carrie.
And I was also curious, kind of along those lines, but how the book has been either received in Taiwan, or how you thought about your narrative and writing, because so much of Taiwanese history is also quite politicized, right? Like even the terminology that it's chosen to use and do so. Were you intentional then about like staying neutral, or like going with one side or the other?
Okay, I'll go in reverse order.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. So I set out to write a green book, not in the sense of a book promoting the DPP or its you know, agenda or anything like that. But we've only gotten like basically the blue or red version of Taiwan in our media for most of our lives, right? And I remember going to Taiwan and thinking I knew what was going on, you know, and very quickly realizing I didn't. And then, yeah, you realize that terms like mainland are political. You know, Taiwanese people never called China mainland before the KMT. They called it Tangshan. There's, you know, and you know, you say like reunification. That implies that, you know, they were together, and that, you know, the history just doesn't really jive with that. Yeah, and this kind of blends in with like editors and stuff. So there's a lot more journalists, because so many foreign journalists can't go to China. So you got a lot of the China journalists who are based in Taiwan now. And the Foreign Correspondents Club is bigger than it's ever been. It's amazing. But you know, so a lot of these China correspondents are also covering Taiwan, and so you're getting like more depth and breadth to Taiwanese reporting by international media than ever before. But the gatekeepers are still editors, and there's no like editors in Taipei, you know. So they're still kind of outside, and unless they've spent time in Taiwan, it's kind of hard for them to understand the nuance. You know, no one's not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying, you know, it's hard to write about a place or edit about a place that you're not familiar with or not even in. So I think that's kind of a thing. But I spoke to kind of connected to this. Spoke with in the book. I interviewed a couple of Taiwanese journalists who write for international media, and it's like, you know, young journalists who it's like, oh, you know, it must be cool to write for like one of the biggest newspapers on the planet, but like, what's it like to not be able to call your own country a country, you know? And like, you can guess what they might have said to that. And then with regards to the exercises, okay, so recent polls, there's different polls, but there's one poll that I think is fairly, I mean, it seems reliable, and I think it had the willingness of Taiwan. 60% of Taiwanese respondents were like willing to fight, like if they were attacked, right, without provoking China, and then and that number goes up, like I think to like the 70s or something like that. It goes up higher if it's like and other countries come in to help. So I think there's, you know, I think Taiwanese people are very much focused on their day-to-day lives, well, just like everybody, right? But you know, if you know, if things get nasty, I think you know, and even if you're like, I don't want to fight, you know, a missile comes in, or like, you know, some member of your family dies or something like that because of a Chinese attack, that might change your perspective. But I think the will to fight is there, but you know, like in terms of like this defense stuff and like passing the special budget, you know, there's starting to be some questioning in although like Washington does seem to be aware of like the political kind of divide, you know, like, and how it's like the KMT and TPP kind of preventing this thing, and yeah, like the U.S. is keen to sell weapons to Taiwan, but yeah, it's a pretty complex thing. But I think at the end of the day, it's also pretty simple. Most Taiwanese people want to keep what they have. They're not asking they don't want to take anything from China, and I think the majority of people would probably be okay with giving Jinmen and Mazu and the National Palace Museum collection to China in exchange for like them just like giving up their claim.
All right. Unfortunately, we are at time. I'm sorry for everyone else who wanted to ask a question. But let's give Chris a round of applause. Thank you for a very informative talk. Thank you.